How do you move heavy artillery, fuel, and entire base camps across 1,000 miles of Arctic wilderness where snow buries a man to his shoulders and the nearest road does not exist? During the Cold War, that question was not hypothetical. It was a survival problem, and a single breakdown at -40 could leave crews stranded for weeks with no rescue coming. The answer demanded massive haulers most people have never heard of, each engineered around one critical number. Nothing in the Arctic yields easily, not even the ground beneath your feet. Snow can swallow a truck whole, and muskeg, that half-frozen northern swamp, turns solid steel into stuck scrap in minutes. The answer to crossing such terrain starts with a single, stubborn law of physics: ground pressure. When a machine's weight presses down on too small a footprint, it punches through snow, bogs, and ice. But spread that same weight over a much larger area, and the machine floats where others sink. Canadian engineers faced this problem head-on in the 1950s, searching for a way to haul supplies and men across the wilds of Alberta and the Yukon. Their solution was the Nodwell 110, a tracked carrier that looked more like a tank than a truck, but with a very different mission. Each Nodwell rode on 40-inch wide tracks, stretching nearly 10 feet across from edge to edge. At full load, over 11,000 pounds in the original Army trials, this machine pressed down with just 4.3 pounds per square inch. That is less than the pressure of a standing man in heavy boots and nearly a tenth of what a typical Army truck would inflict on the same patch of snow. This was not just theory. In field tests during Exercise Willow Freeze, the Nodwell 110 rolled through snowdrifts and muskeg where every wheeled vehicle stalled out. Canadian engineer operators put their faith in the math, but also in thick steel construction and a drive system built for punishment. The hydrostatic transmission allowed for zero-radius turns, while the high-clearance chassis shrugged off buried stumps and frozen ruts. The result was a machine that could travel where no road had ever been built, carrying fuel, shelters, and radar equipment to places that had never seen a supply convoy before. By focusing on ground pressure and track width, the Nodwell 110 set the benchmark for Arctic mobility. It proved that physics, not brute force, would decide who survived and who got stranded. The next challenge would be speed, because in the Arctic, slow is just another word for stuck. Soviet logistics planners faced the same Arctic obstacles: snowfields that buried wheels, frozen rivers, and endless stretches of muskeg. Their answer was the ATS-59G, a tracked artillery tractor built to drag heavy guns and supply trailers across ground where ordinary trucks became liabilities. The ATS-59G was no lightweight. It carried a reputation for brute torque, its V12 diesel engine pushing through drifts and over ice with the kind of force only military priorities could demand. Every inch of its track was designed to distribute weight, but even the best steel could only do so much. In deep snow, the tracks bit in and kept moving, but speed was never on the table. Missions that should have taken hours stretched into days, and the limits of tracked mobility became painfully clear. Recovery crews learned to respect the Arctic's patience. A single breakdown could leave a column stranded, and the cold did not care if you wore a uniform or a parka. Soviet doctrine called for redundancy: convoys of ATS-59Gs, each ready to tow the next, carrying spare parts and fuel in case the lead vehicle failed. But even with careful planning, the operational pace slowed to a crawl. Hauling artillery or radar units across the tundra was possible, but only at the cost of time and manpower. The tracked solution, while reliable, was not efficient. Soviet officers began to question whether tracks alone could meet the demands of rapid deployment and supply, especially as Arctic ambitions grew. Curiosity turned to innovation. Across the border in Western Europe, engineers watched these challenges and began sketching alternatives: machines that traded steel tracks for massive balloon-like tires. Early concepts, like the Ural 5920, promised to float over snow by spreading weight even further, reducing ground pressure below what tracks could manage. The idea was simple: If tracks could not deliver both speed and flotation, perhaps wheels, if made wide enough, soft enough, and driven by enough power, could. The stage was set for an engineering contest that would reshape Arctic mobility, pitting tradition against experimentation in the world's most unforgiving climate. Raw horsepower became the next obsession in the Arctic. Soviet designers at the ZIL factory set out to build a vehicle that could do what tracks could not: storm over snowdrifts and tundra using nothing but wheels. Their answer was the ZIL E-167, a behemoth that looked less like a truck and more like a rolling experiment in mechanical audacity. This machine stood taller than a man, its body perched on 6 enormous human-height tires, each one wide enough to cradle a grown adult. The idea was radical for its time. If you could spread weight across enough rubber and drive every axle with enough torque, you might just keep moving where other vehicles bogged down. The E-167 engineering team pushed beyond convention, fitting the chassis with twin engines and a multi-axle drive system that sent power to every wheel. Each tire acted like a snowshoe, floating the machine over soft drifts and frozen swamps. The logic was simple: double the torque, double the drive, and let the tires claw for grip. West German engineers watched this approach with interest, countering with their own torque monsters like the SLT-50 Elephant, a heavy haul tractor designed to move missile components and bridge sections across snowbound terrain. Both teams believed in the same principle, that enough power delivered evenly to enough wheels could turn the Arctic into something almost manageable. For a brief moment, the Arctic became a proving ground for these wheel-driven giants. Each new design grew larger, stronger, and more ambitious, as engineers chased the dream of speed without sacrificing the ability to float. The age of the torque monster had arrived, setting the stage for the next leap: machines that could not only power through the snow, but adapt their shape and footprint to whatever the frozen landscape demanded. Arctic engineers faced a challenge: how to move heavy loads across ground that could swallow even military haulers. In Alaska, Crowley's teams found that traditional wheels and tracks simply pressed too hard on muskeg and river ice. Their solution was the Rolagon, a vehicle that swapped narrow tires for massive soft cylinders. Each wider than a man, is tall and inflated to just above basketball pressure. This design spread the weight so evenly that a loaded Rolagon pressed down with less than 2 pounds per square inch, allowing it to glide over boggy tundra where tracked vehicles would leave scars or sink. Crowley's field logs from the late 1960s describe these machines floating across summer ground, hauling drilling modules and fuel tanks where bulldozers got stuck. The logistics coordinator remembered jobs where only the Rolagon could reach the site, its ultra-low pressure tires making the difference between success and disaster. Across the Arctic, Soviet engineers at the Vityaz program took another route. They built the DT-30 with 2 tracked units joined by a central pivot, letting the vehicle bend and flex over ridges and broken ice. Hydraulic joints allowed each half to steer independently, keeping the tracks flat and maintaining traction where rigid machines would slip. Soviet factory files show this articulation joint was the heart of the Vityaz, enabling it to cross uneven terrain without breaking apart or bogging down. Both designs reveal a shift, not just more power, but smarter contact with the land. The dream of conquering the Arctic by land reached its greatest scale with the land trains, machines so long they seemed to stretch to the horizon. The VC-22 snow freighter, built by R.G. Letourneau for Alaska Freight Lines, measured nearly 300 feet from lead cab to trailing cargo cars. Each wheel hub carried its own electric motor, distributing power across dozens of tires and allowing the convoy to haul up to 150 tons of supplies. In 1954, the VC-22 set out from Fairbanks on a 400-mile journey north, braving -68 degrees and snowdrifts deeper than a man is tall. The Overland Train Mark II would push this ambition even further, with claims of more than 100 meters of linked cars and a turbine electric drive system that on paper could move entire outposts in a single rolling caravan. But ambition met reality in stories like Exercise Musk Ox, a Canadian military traverse that covered 3,200 miles across the high Arctic. Crew diaries describe nights when engines froze solid and axles snapped in the cold. Repairs meant crawling under the chassis with numb hands, improvising fixes from whatever parts could be spared. One entry tells of a breakdown 200 miles from the nearest settlement, where the convoy spent days rationing fuel and melting snow for water, waiting for air-dropped supplies. The lesson was clear. No matter how advanced the machine, the Arctic always demanded respect. Every mile gained could be lost to a single mechanical failure. For engineers and crews alike, the cost of progress was measured not just in tons hauled, but in risk endured and lives put on the line. Today, Arctic logistics still depend on the engineering principles forged in those bitter decades, with wide tracks, low ground pressure, and relentless problem solving. As new frontiers open and climate extremes intensify, the quiet battle against the physics of the North resumes. The Ice E never forgets. For more untold engineering stories, subscribe.